Hey there, listeners. Well, I had an interview with a lady called Ellen Wood, and she's the CEO and co-founder of VCFO. And that is a Austin-based professional services firm, but it's really well known for its innovation around the virtual CFO concept. Now, Ellen is a trailblazer, especially around providing fractional C-suite kind of individuals or services as well. And that's hence why the title is called Introducing the Fractional Executive. Ellen shares more about that in the interview. The other things we actually covered off as well was the fact that leadership is not about titles. The buck stops with you. And also, it's important for us to start setting strong cultures within an organization. But one thing that Ellen mentioned a couple of times, which I really loved hearing her say it, was that as leaders, we are lifelong learners. And so an awesome concept as well. So there you go, listeners. Sit back and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Leadership is Changing podcast. Great to have you here with us. I have an awesome guest with me today. Her name is Ellen Wood. Ellen, a massive welcome to you.
Thank you, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's great. Tell me, whereabouts in the world are you today?
Well, I am coming to you from Austin, Texas. 102 degrees today.
Yeah, that's hot. For those who are in Celsius, that's hot. And I've been in Austin, and I've been in Houston and Dallas as well. And when it's been 105 and it's really, really hot. So what a great time to be there, because this part of the world, we're freezing. We're in winter. But isn't it interesting how different parts of the world, using technology, we can have a conversation about leadership and about change. And so it's really good. Now, I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you. You are the CEO and co-founder of an organization called VCFO, and that is also based in Austin as well. And tell us more about you and your background, but also a little bit more about VCFO as well.
Well, glad to do it. I'm a native Texan, CPA. I refer to myself as a recovering CFO, but I'm 100% entrepreneur. I just love what I do, and I feel really lucky to be able to do that. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. I have an adult son and a fabulous grand dog. So that's a little bit about me. While I was still in college pursuing a finance and management degree, I realized that accounting was really the guts of a business in terms of understanding how it worked. And so I finished up the accounting hours and got a CPA. And then I took that into my first love, which was real estate. But that was not a great time to go into real estate in Texas. For those of you listening in Texas, you may remember that. I moved from that to a really interesting telecom startup, which had the opportunity to purchase one of the very first internet companies in the United States. So that was a super experience. I didn't realize just how unique it was at the time. We packaged that up after taking it international and sold it. And then that gave me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do. And that was create this company that is VCFO. Was originally virtual CFO. That's our trade name. But as anybody who's ever looked for that word on the web understands, it has been borrowed heavily, just like Kleenex happened to them. So we rebranded as VCFO and pioneered the concept of fractional executives. We were doing it when people were saying that will never work. And it certainly has worked very well. So we are a team of finance and HR professionals. We've been doing this for 28 years. We work with multiple clients as their chief financial officer or their HR professional. And we have now worked with more than 6,000 clients from our 4 geographies, which 3 are here in Texas, Houston, Dallas, Austin, and then Denver.
You know
So
what?
that's a little bit about it.
That's very good. And we're hearing around the world a lot more that word fractional. It's been said a lot more. It's been used a lot more. Even from an L&D and learning and development perspective, you can have a fractional CLO. There's lots of different sort of roles that can be done. Fractional, for our listeners, can you explain a little bit more what we mean by fractional?
Well, we are all employees of VCFO, and all of us had roles in industry for small, medium sized businesses. And we work for multiple clients at one time. So, as an employee of VCFO, we work on a consulting basis to multiple clients. So, we might be with one client 10 hours a week and another client 15 hours a week, and it changes week over week, day over day. But it is, I think, a very, very needed service for small, medium sized businesses. They can access the expertise they need at a price point they can afford.
There you go, listeners. For those of you who say to me sometimes, or to others as well, oh, I can't afford to have that kind of person. Well, there's your excuse gone. The side of having somebody who may be virtual, but also someone who's fractional, you can use them in your organization. And as Ellen's just said, bring the expertise into your organization, which is key, which is really important for us as leaders in building our organizations. Ellen, how long ago did you start VCFO?
28 years.
Wow.
28 years ago.
Yeah, and so in those days, they would have said it wouldn't work. Interesting, eh?
Absolutely. Well, 28 years ago was a real interesting time in Austin when we were seeing first technology startups. Everything had been in the Bay Area. And so there was just many, many, many opportunities to work with some of these fabulous early stage technology companies who were better early adopters than maybe your average company would have been.
Yeah, yeah. So when I ask people questions about being an early adopter, is it good to be an early adopter or is it just good to be an adopter? What's your thoughts? An adopter, in other words, should I start first or should I just see what's going on in the market and then take that and see how I can improve it? Which is the best way? What do you reckon? What are your thoughts?
Well, my thought is I love being an early adopter. I think it's fabulous. And so I'm always going to be for it. There's other environments maybe where it makes less sense, though, perhaps more regulated environments where the risks are different. But generally, I'm all in for early adoption.
Yeah, I love asking some questions sometimes when I'm doing events with senior execs and then going, Apple, that company, the one that's got the phone and so forth and the computers. Yeah, yeah. Early adopter or late adopter? And they go, oh, early? And I go, no, it's a late adopter. And they go, what do you mean? Well, they didn't invent the phone. There was already a phone out there. They just took it and enhanced it, but then marketed it very well, way better than anyone else. And that's where we've seen it take off. So yeah, you're right. At times there's the early adopter and at times you may be a late adopter, depending on your organization, your product, your service, and what you're doing as well.
Well, one of our earliest clients was garden.com. I don't know if you ever heard of those folks. It was a US based company, but it's what the name implies. It was one of the very, very early companies where you could order flowers online or you could order a rose bush to be delivered to your mother. And the problems that they were trying to solve at that time were just amazing. Like, how do you know where you can buy roses in a certain quantity on a certain date and get them delivered by? Those things had not been figured out. So, in their case, later adopters were able to benefit from a lot of the groundwork that was done, to your point. But I'm still always going to be an early adopter.
Yeah, no, it's great. Very good. Now, do you have people join your organization who may be, say, in the corporate world or working in other organizations as a financial CFO and so forth, coming into your organization to do what your organization do? Do they transition from the corporate world into your organization?
Absolutely. Every single person we hire has years and years of experience sitting in the chair that they sit in for our clients. This is not a learn on the job location.
Yeah, yeah. The reason I'm asking that question is that for a lot of leaders, they're sitting in a job today, and I actually think a lot of them are bored in what they're doing. And so they wanted to go and do something else, but there's that fear of stepping out and going and doing something. The transition of going, say, like from a corporate job into an organization like yours, how do people find it? Is it an easy transition or is it difficult? Where's it at?
It depends on the person. We are very, very selective in our interview process, and we're very, very upfront about what we're not and where people will see the challenges so that they can think about it because it is very different. But a almost universal characteristic I find of folks that do want to work in an environment like ours is they are lifelong learners. They love learning new things. They are people who give back, which is real important to our culture here. So they enjoy mentoring teams and you really can't, you can do that in a single environment, but you really get that opportunity in an environment like ours.
Yeah. And even because the other side of your business as well, you're saying CFO and HR, even an HR perspective, what we started doing in an HP was to bring people who weren't just pure HR people. We brought people in from the business into HR. So when they were sitting opposite the business, they actually had A, credibility, and B, they can see what's going on and they could call it out, right? Which is a little bit different to, say, maybe those who are not seasoned HR people. So I think your organization would actually bring that expertise, that ability to help leaders build their organizations with credibility, which is a good thing.
Well, thank you for saying so. We certainly think so.
Mm. Now, how did you actually get into leadership?
Well, I'm the oldest daughter of three, so I think there's something to the leadership issue of being the oldest daughter. So that would be my earliest role. And then I worked my way through college working for a grocery store, and I managed the store at night. And oh my gosh, I learned so much about managing people. I was the youngest one working, but I was managing them and the clients and the people. So that I think everybody should have the experience of some client facing roles in their early years. Then I got out of college and my first professional role, I started over again at the bottom as an assistant controller and quickly promoted to a controller and then CFO. So I don't think leadership is about titles, but I do think a lot more is expected of you as you move up the ladder. So starting my own company in 1996 is really where I had leadership by immersion. There was nobody else to look at but me. The buck stops with me and the buck should stop with you when you're the boss. So I would say that one of the most important things I did at that point was focus on culture.
Hmm.
I think culture is integral to leadership. And I think that you need to, I mean, it was wonderful for me to have an opportunity to set what I thought was most important and then to try to live those values and bring my folks along to do the same, to embrace them and embody them in what we do. As an example, our first four values are people first, that's our people first, integrity, which is table stakes for what we do, professionalism and teamwork. I'd also say in the past 10 years, I focused a lot more on accountability and how important that is to an organization and how important it is to leaders and providing that clarity to everyone so they know where we're going and how they fit into that. And that involves a lot of communication. You cannot communicate too much.
Mm.
And in that process, we adopted a program called EOS. You may have heard of it. It's the
Yes.
Entrepreneurial
Yes.
Operating System from Traction. And we recommend that to all our clients and pretty much anyone we're having a conversation with about leadership. It's been fabulous for our own team from an accountability and communication perspective. And it's just a very heavy focus on accountability.
And I really like how,
So that's how we got here.
yeah, nice. And I really like
Yeah.
how you've got people first, and those values
Mhm.
is, yeah. Too many organizations, I think they leave that to the last piece. Oh, and by the way, and people. And I'm like, well, shouldn't that be up front? And I really like how you said it first, and I presume it's always been shown as first. So it's a good thing. Accountability, that's a huge thing because I think culture is really strong, but accountability. What do you see in the market today? Are leaders being accountable to A, themselves, and B, the organization, their teams enough? Or do you think there's gaps? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think there's always gaps. We can always do better as
Mm.
leaders. Any leader can do a better job of that. So I think and it also depends on the environment that you're in too. You have your public environment, which has a different set of stakeholders. And then you have your private environments, which is the world what I work in. And that's most of the world, really. It's most of the businesses are going to be private businesses. So I think accountability is really important. And I think that there's much room to improve.
Yeah. When you say improve, this could be another whole episode by itself just on this topic, right? But I think the thing here is if there's one or two things you think, based on your experience around accountability, what should leaders think about or do in relation to accountability? How can they be more accountable?
Well, we actually have an accountability chart,
Mm.
which is part of EOS. And I think it is a fabulous thing. And it is not the same thing as an organizational chart. It actually talks about what are you responsible for, not what your title is, not who you report to, although that's important too. It talks about what are you responsible for doing. And I'll give you an example. When COVID hit, I was in Norway, right? Talking to my team here, watching South by one of our enormous conferences get canceled while I'm in another country. And because we were so in tune with one another on an accountability chart, we were pivoted and operational again within a week. So that's just an example of a crisis that encountered an organization that had taken the steps to make sure that we all knew what our roles were. So that's one more reason I highly recommend it.
Yeah, great. And I also know that based on that scenario you just said about adapting or pivoting during the COVID time, the organizations, as you just said, strong accountability, but also strong trust. Where there was trust. Trust is a very strong foundation. And that's how I saw a lot of organizations do it quickly. Others took longer, may not have done so well, but because this trust wasn't quite there in the organization. So I think accountability with trust creates an awesome culture. If I was to ask you the question here, which is, for a lot of us, we have leaders that we followed in the past and people that may be alive or from history today. But who's your favorite leader and why?
Well, my favorite leader would be George Washington. And the reason for that is that I think he was an incredible leader at a remarkable time in history, not just for the United States, but the world, when you look back on what that meant. And from my reading and history is, I'm sure it would have been different if there had been the mainstream media then and all of the transparency we have today. But I believe he genuinely strived to do the right thing for the country. And I think that he did an amazing job of demonstrating how important it is to walk away from power, because he's someone who probably could have been president for life if he had wanted to. And one of the things, if I could have a minute with him to ask him something, I would really ask him, how did he decide that was really what he needed to do? How did he decide that was the right decision? Because I'm sure it wasn't popular with a whole lot of people at that time. But when we look back on it, I think it's an amazing event in the life of the world.
Yeah, it's a great question. You obviously saw my notes. I was going to ask you if you were sitting on a bench having a coffee with him, what would be one question you want to ask him? And I think it's a brilliant question because too many of us sit back and we look at things and what's happening in the world, but we don't always understand what's in behind it or the whole background, the full picture. And it's not easy to being a leader at times. So your experience, I presume you've had times where you've had to make decisions that weren't easy. What are your thoughts or what are your comments for leaders who are listening to this episode if they have to make a hard decision? What should they do?
Well, that is a great question, and I'm regularly faced with it. In fact, we were discussing that yesterday with someone else, and we are basically a democracy here. But when a tough decision has to be made, a leader has to step up and make it, whether it's popular or not. If it is in the best interest of the organization or the shareholder, depending on where your responsibilities are really everywhere in that area, then you have to own it and you have to execute it and you have to lead your team through it.
Yeah, that's great. And you do have to own it, don't you? It's nothing worse than a leader that makes a decision, then undoes it, or is not sure. I always say, Ellen, to people that people don't want to follow a leader that doesn't make decisions. They want someone to make decisions and let's get on with it. I think the problem is a lot of people try to make sure it's the right decision or it's a perfect decision. And it never will be perfect. Times you're going to make a decision and sometimes you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to adjust depending on what's going on. When we talk about the podcast here and we talk about leadership is changing, it's a title, it's a statement. What does it mean for you?
Well, for me at this stage in my career, I feel like I have a long trajectory I'm looking back on that I can comment to you about. I found in my early career, it was more of a fear. There was more of a fear in the workplace of leaders. It was a very, very different environment. And I'm delighted to be where we are today and not where we were. It was not focused on employee well-being or employee development for the most part. That's not a universal statement. So I think over the years, what I've seen is transparency and authenticity have become much more important and much more valued and much more alive in leaders and in their organizations. I think I've talked already about accountability, but I think leaders really have to be accountable to those teams. You've got to acknowledge and advocate the importance of exclusivity and sustainability. That's a couple of things that are changes. 10 years ago, probably you didn't hear much about that. 20 years ago, you definitely didn't hear much about that. So I think which just wasn't part of the leadership vocabulary. I wonder, in listening to that question that you asked, what are the things that are actually present today, but we haven't identified them yet? Because that's the change that we'll be looking back on a decade from now.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid I don't know what that is. If I did, I would suggest it.
Well, yeah, of course, because as you said, it's probably sitting in front of us, but we're not sure what it is yet. But yeah, And even having some hindsight would be great. But I mean, looking back over time and looking back at what's actually happened and that whole journey has been really interesting. It's never been a straight line. There's been all sorts of things happening. Even going back to your example before around COVID, the pandemic, the lockdowns and things like that, we had to work differently and it was changing all the time. I think that there's another thing too here too, Ellen, is the fact that if we as leaders aren't changing quick enough, we're going to start to become irrelevant and then being left behind. It's not just us as leaders, but it's also as an organization going forward. And we've seen too many organizations go down that track and not adjust. And I think it's important. How would leaders, in your thoughts, how would leaders need to stay relevant? What should they be doing on a regular basis to help them be relevant and still move ahead with the times?
Well, that's a great question too. I'm a member of Vistage. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're a worldwide organization, a CEO peer group. And I find that the conversations that we have as members on a monthly basis on this topic are very helpful. The speakers that we listen to, the books that are recommended, there's lots of interesting information. We could probably list 100 authors right now who have, and in some cases it's not really new, but I think that you need to be constantly learning. And to do that, you need to be in conversation and asking.
Yeah, so that would be not only just reading the books as you said, but also this other piece, which I think some leaders aren't doing enough of, and that is networking and out there building their networks in the industry, within their organization, and out in the industry and outside the industry, to be asking those kind of questions, to be able to grow and learn on what's going on. And as you said, it's ongoing learning. It's a wonderful thing, and something that I think a lot of people need to do. And I think this is why this podcast, people have been coming to it now because so many episodes, so many interviews, it's a go-to asset if they have a question around leadership and so forth. We've covered so many different topics. And even in the 4 years that this has been going, things are changing for leadership and things are changing in the market and the way we do things. And so you've got to stay ahead of it and learn it. But I think sometimes people panic in the sense that, well, how much can I learn? And there's so much going on. And I go, hey, one book at a time, one episode at a time. Just take your time and see what you need to do and what's relevant for you. We seem to be living in a world where, I don't know, maybe it's just me getting older, I don't know, but it feels like it's getting faster and faster, whether it be technology, whether it be data, business, social. What does a leader need to do to make sure that they're successful in a fast-paced, ever-changing world?
Well, I do think the pace has picked up, but I think some of the basics are the same. And I think that setting that strong culture, which I talked about earlier, I think that is critical. And without it, I almost don't think you can succeed. And then you need to live it. Some of those other table stakes are behaving with integrity, leading with transparency, communicating, over communicating. What do they say? You have to say it 7 times for the average person to take it in. And I think there's some truth to that. In fact, we kid about it around here. Okay, this is the 5th time that we've talked about it. I also think it's important, and this is different from what I observed early in my career. I think you have to be humble. And I think you have to actually demonstrate respect for your employees and those that you're leading. I don't think respect is due to you just because of your title. I think you have to earn it, but I think you owe it to others in the organization. And then another important thing to me about being a leader today is giving back. And I think leading your company or your team, whatever it is that you're leading them in, giving back to the community in whatever way works for you. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's other things. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I love the giving
I
back
love
piece as well. All
this
of
one.
what you just said there is really good. The giving back piece is really interesting because the thing is, I think that you and I, where we are in our careers and where we've got to in our careers is because others have given, whether it be their experiences or given us here's another way of looking at it, giving us the opportunity by us working on a certain project. That's how we've learnt. That's how we've grown. And so giving back, it doesn't have to be only just money or time, as you said. It could be a whole lot of things, right? Even having a coffee with you and asking you some questions and you sharing and pouring your experience into the other person is another way of giving back. When you said about the culture, setting it and living it, tell us more about the living it. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think you just have to demonstrate that you do. For example, for us, with people first, our people need to see that. We regularly survey them. We ask them, tell us what it is that's not working for you, is working for you. What can we do that would be different? Just as an example. So I think that is very important. We also have a channel on Slack, which we use here. We call it Kudos. And we make a real effort to share the compliments that come in from our clients or even from our professionals about another professional on the team they've worked with. We publicly acknowledge, and then we tie that activity, whatever it was, to our value that it demonstrated. So if it was professionalism, if it was teamwork, if it was communicating, if it was leading with integrity, then I think that's very important too. So what we're doing is we're constantly demonstrating what it means to follow the words that we've decided as a company embody our culture.
Yeah, great. Ellen, you and I have been talking about leadership from the lens of a leader. If we were to change lens now and think it from an employee's perspective, has employees' expectations of leaders changed?
I think so. I think it's much higher now, and I'm glad to see it. Without the employee expectations rising, I don't think we'd be having the conversation that we're having today.
Mm,
So I think it's much higher. And I think that's very reasonable for them to expect a leader to demonstrate the qualities that we've talked about and to exhibit interest in them and help develop their career, those sorts of things. So
mm.
I would say yes,
Yeah,
big yes.
yeah, definitely. And the way I look at it as well is it's more like a partnership nowadays where you and the leader are partnering to get this project, get this initiative, this task, whatever it is over the line. But it is a two-way dialogue where in the past, I think it used to be a one-way dialogue. And I am the boss and I have the title and that's how it used to work. But nowadays that doesn't work at all.
Mm-mm.
Not at all. No. In where you are, okay, your organization may be a little bit different, but in say in your part of the world, we've seen a lot of people working from home, the hybrid side of things, so forth from the pandemic. Has that swung now? Are you seeing organizations bringing staff back into or employees back into the office, or how's it looking nowadays?
Definitely have. There's a lot of discussion about it. There are some very large employers that are requiring people to relocate. Walmart being a great example, taking everybody back to Bentonville, Arkansas, of all things. But that's what they think is important for their culture, as an example. Here, we've always had the opportunity to work virtually or on site, just depending on what the client wants. And so our corporate team has a hybrid. We've settled on a hybrid approach so that they have some benefit of flexibility, but yet still, I think the collaboration and the team energy is important when you have a home office where people can gather.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of companies take that approach as well. But yes, I think it has definitely swung back.
Yeah. In this part of the world, what we're seeing is that it's swinging back. The retailers in the city are going like, bring people back to work because they're
For
suffering. And then on the other side, we're finding that a lot of organizations have gone to that hybrid model. Some of the leaders I get to work with, they are wanting people back full time in the office and they're pulling their hair out. But then on the other side, they understand what the dynamics and what's going on. So they've gone and set it for 3 days a week or some of them 4 days a week into the office. But there is one day in particular that they want all the team to be in the office on that one day. So not everyone's choosing different days. So an example that could be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're all in the office. Monday and Friday can be working from home, or it may vary different organizations. So we're seeing the swing from a commercial real estate perspective. Yeah, a lot of organizations are downsizing in the floor space that they may, or that sort of what they have, that sort of footprint is reducing. But then we're seeing other new buildings being built and new offices and more people coming in. So it's like, wow, what's happening here? The other thing I'm noticing is, and I'm not sure about you, but it's how we talk about that gig economy and people working from home, their businesses and so forth. I go for a walk around the neighborhood here and I stopped counting at 49 different businesses just around the 3 or 4 streets around here. And I'm like, wow, you're seeing a lot more people going and starting their own businesses and working from home as well. A lot of that is based on redundancies or the COVID, downsizing, financial crisis and so forth. But it's really good to see people taking more control in their own hands and they're working on their own things that they've been wanting to do. Have you seen that happen as well?
Absolutely. I'm a tremendous supporter of that. It's very much placed in the entrepreneur in me. So I think you're right. And I think it's different reasons too. I think you're seeing a lot more people comfortable with the fractional model as an example, whether they're working independently or aligned with a group. So Yes. In fact, I thought you were going to say you walked around and you noticed all the hot spots that popped up because I do that sometimes. And you can see that there's like walking down the street, there's a lot of businesses.
Yeah, there is. Actually, what I'm noticing is, and it might be old school, but you know the old sandwich board type thing that used to be on the footpath or the sidewalk where people would actually advertise their business? That's what I've seen a lot more around here, is that on the sidewalk, I'm calling it sidewalk for you, we call it footpath, there's a lot of these kind of boards where they're advertising their own businesses, or they've got you may have it there in the thing in the States where the real estate person will actually have the post with the for sale sign hanging. And that's how people are advertising their businesses. And I'm like, well, that's a bit old school, but you know what? It seems to be working. So
I have not seen that, but maybe that's coming this way.
no. Oh, yes, New Zealand, leading from the front again. That's all good. Hey, if you were to get your crystal ball out and think about the future now, where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Wow. I wish I knew. I do think that one of the biggest things in front of us in the next 5 years, though, is going to be bringing AI into our businesses in a way that our employees don't fear it, but they actually embrace it. I think that, I think that's, I think that's one of the biggest challenges when we're talking earlier about what are those things right here that 10 years from now we'll look back and say, well, of course they were there. We just didn't see them. That's one I think we have some visibility to.
Yeah. Yeah. And AI, there are people who are fearing it for sure. Embracing it, it's just like change. We can embrace it and move forward. That's great. But I do think there's another thing too here, Alan, that if the organization isn't a strong business, their core business is strong, doesn't matter what AI you have, it ain't going to work very well. So the thing I say to people is make sure your business is strong.
Right. Well, fundamentals are very important. I just think that is a leadership challenge that I have some visibility to
Yeah, definitely.
with my little cloudy crystal ball.
Good on you. Hey, if the listeners are wanting to get a hold of you, where should they go?
Well, an easy place would be to check out our website. It's just VCFO.com, like virtual chief financial officer.com. And you can fill out a contact there or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you do pop over to the website, you might want to take a look at our homepage. There's a couple of pulse surveys that are there that talk about leadership. And you might want to see how we think you stack up against other people based on a very large population of companies that we've reviewed.
Excellent. Well, there you go, listeners. There's a bit of an offer there for you to go and check that out on the website. And we'll put the website into the show note as well. But Alan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
There you go, listeners. Well, leadership is not about titles. And the thing here is this, is that are you willing to walk away from the power that you have as a leader? The thing here for a lot of us is that if you can set a strong culture and live it, if you can communicate really well, stay humble, and give back as a leader, you're going to be a very strong leader, but you're going to have an awesome organization. Hey, thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.